What's going on, guys? Wow, I've put a lot of work. I know it doesn't seem like it, but I've actually put so much time into SeptemPeaks. I really hope you guys are enjoying it so far. We're on to week 2 now. We're going to be covering season 2, and we're not doing a whole lot of it. We're going to really just stick with the beginning, some light notes on the meat and potatoes, like the beginning of the season, and then we're going to do the finale, which is my personal favorite part. So here we go. The first episode of the second season, we open in the Great Northern, pretty much where we left off. Cooper has been shot. Cooper was shot as a cliffhanger to the first season, and now we're moments after the end of the first season. So Coop's room service shows up, and he acts very strange. And Jay had mentioned that, Tommy J had mentioned that he believed it had something to do with the giant, and I quickly dismissed that because there's never a correlation up to this point between the room service guy and the giant, other than they appear one after another. But I have to address that at the end of season 2, so we'll get back to that. And it's really sweet because at this point, Coop is on the verge of death. Coop is literally laying on the ground, dying, bleeding out. And the guy, the room service guy, just approaches him and is like, you know, here's your warm milk. Andy's still on the phone, so he's still asking to talk to Cooper. And the guy gets him to sign his bill. And Coop makes sure that he tips the guy before he signs it, even while he's dying. Like, that's how good a square guy this is. I mean, he's just a good person. So then the room service guy comes back and he says that he's heard of Cooper, and then he gives him the thumbs up. And he does this 3 times. So the first 2 times, Coop reaffirms the thumbs up. The 3rd time, Cooper shakes his finger at him like, no. So you're kind of like, huh? Then the giant shows up, and the giant reveals to him 3 more things. There will be a man in a smiling bag. The owls are not what they seem. And without chemicals, he points. So these are just kind of clues early on as to things that are about to happen throughout the series, and maybe even in ways we don't expect. Jerry is back at One-Eyed Jack's, and he is talking with Black Rose, and he kind of torments her a little bit about her drug addiction. Ben Horn is at One-Eyed Jack's, and he decides, as his celebration, he's going to see the new girl. So then he goes and sees the new girl, Prudence, who we all know is Audrey, but of course he has no idea. So then I just wanted to pose a question real quick for this specific episode. Is Coop's predicament here, where he's got a gut shot essentially, is that connected in any way to Leland in Fire Walk With Me? Because in Fire Walk With Me, there's a entire scene where they're in the Red Room and Bob pulls the Garmonbozia out of Leland in the form of blood. So and it's like a blood stain on his lower gut area. So it's just a weird, curious thing. There's another motif of it later in the season at the very end when Coop is in the Red Room again, and we'll get to that later, but it's just a little bit of a connection, which is interesting to me. So then laying there, not knowing if he's going to live or die, Coop makes some new life resolutions, one of which is he's going to be a better person to other human beings, which is a funny thing for Coop to say, but he does. So then Truman and Andy bring Cooper to Doc Hayward, and then while he's kind of laying there recovering, Doc Hayward's giving him the once-over. Lucy brings Cooper and the audience up to date as to the things that happened towards the end of the last season and possibly between then and now. Leo Johnson was shot. Jacques Renault was strangled. The mill was burned. Shelley and Catherine have smoke inhalation. Pete is missing. And then Nadine is in a coma because of her suicide attempt. And then Lucy is also still calling Andy Officer Brennan, showing that they still have some kind of tension going on. So then, Back at the Palmer residence, Sarah asks Maddie if she misses her mother, and then Maddie is looking down at the carpet, remembering a dream she had. So then Leland shows up in the living room, singing with all white hair, which we have not seen him with at all yet. And then Maddie, after the fact, sees the stain on the floor and screams. She gives us the Laura Palmer scream before we hear the Laura Palmer scream. Ben Horn kind of goes down the list of things they need to get done with Jerry to kind of cover up this whole mill burning situation. They need to locate Catherine. They need to figure out where she is. They need to get a medical report on Leo Johnson and figure out if he's dead or not. And then they need to ask Hank why Leo Johnson is still alive. Because I believe Leo Johnson was a loose end in, the plan. And here I always felt bad for Leland because it's this situation where he kind of walks into Ben and Jerry Horn talking about their plot and how all this evil stuff they have going on. And Leland's just this, at this point, as far as you know, until you've watched the series more, Leland's this dad who's gone through this great stress, who's trying to get back into life. And like, they just start dancing to him singing, but it feels kind of like they're making fun of him. So I always felt bad for Leland in that regard. And then Cooper and Truman investigate Leo Johnson's murder scene. Well, not, the scene of the crime where he was shot in his house. And then Albert shows up with some more FBI guys outside, and Andy sees him and starts running toward the house like, Sheriff Truman, you know who it is? Do you know who it is? Because they had this confrontation in the first season, and Andy's just put off by Albert, which is understandable. He starts running back to the house to let Sheriff Truman know, and then he happens upon some evidence. In a slapstick sequence, he is running and he hits a plank of wood and it flies up and hits him in the face. Albert makes a comment about it being a great moment in law enforcement history, and it's actually pretty funny because then Truman and Cooper see there's boots and cocaine under this porch. So then Truman slyly is just kind of like, I think you're more right than you know, Albert, And it's kind of funny because Albert's saying it to be a jackass, but he's right. So then Donna and Maddie meet at the Double R Diner. They talk about James and Maddie's Uncle Leland's hair, the white hair. And this is where Donna gets a note, and then the log lady at the end of the scene spits her gum out, just like furiously on the table, and then picks it up and sticks it on the wall. You're just kind of left wondering why, like what's the reason that she changed out her gum at that specific moment, because it's the log lady. She has to have some significance. And the other thing too is that the new gum she appears to put in her mouth, it looks like comes right off the log. And she talks about it being pitch gum, so I'm assuming it's from a tree, but the fact that her log is still producing the pitch after it's, a log, no longer a tree, is interesting. But then Albert and Cooper are kind of having a one-on-one, and Albert informs him that Gordon Cole ordered him to come back after they heard that Coop was shot, just to kind of check on him. And then Andy tells Cooper that Leo Johnson was locked in jail in Hungry Horse, Montana, February 9th, 1988. One of the hints the Giant gave him after the three big hints was that Leo is locked in a horse. In a hungry horse or in a horse, something like that. And so that just kind of gives the literal tie-in to what the Giant meant by that. And the other significance to the plot is that February 9th, 1988 was the night Teresa Banks was murdered, so they can't tie Leo Johnson to Teresa Banks' murder because of that. He has an alibi. So then Mike shows up, and not Mike, Bobby's friend, but Mike with one arm, Mike, to the sheriff's department looking for Sheriff Harry Truman. And then Truman still does not know that James had to do with Jacoby leaving his office. He's still oblivious. Cooper's already figured that out. And James tells Truman that Laura was talking about fire and a mystery man. And I don't remember, I think he mentions to Truman here that Laura asked him if he wanted to play with Bob. And if he wanted to play with fire, does he like to play with fire or something like that. So it's just it's a really creepy like moment that James shares this darkness that was in Laura with someone else. So then this is where Coop reveals that James must have the other half of Laura's necklace, and James is like, I don't know how you knew that, da-da-da-da. And then he leaves, and then Cooper and Truman are there together, and Trooper just tells him, sometimes you just get lucky. So then Donna enters the sheriff's department, and for whatever reason we hear a wolf whistle, and I don't know who does that. Like, they don't show. It's just Lucy sitting at her desk, and I know Lucy is, I mean, maybe, I don't know, maybe she's into bad girls, I don't know. Donna essentially teases James here, and basically just kind of is like, hey, I'm trying to be Laura now, so I'm all freaky now. So get out of jail soon. And it's just weird, you know, it's weird, it's out of character for Donna, but I think that's the point. But a lot of people don't get that. They assume it's just bad acting, and I think that Donna here is trying to tell James that she'll be Laura for him in a way, which is really messed up. But so then Cooper gets Lucy and Andy to look through the Flesh World magazine to try to find Teresa Banks. And then Cooper and Truman ask Dr. Jacoby about Laura's necklace. So then this is where Jacoby tells the two guys that he followed Donna and James in the woods the night Laura was killed, and he found the necklace under a rock, which this brings to fruition Sarah's vision in like one of the first episodes of the show, where she talks about a gloved hand lifting a rock and then taking the necklace. So then this is where Jacoby suggests in the conversation that Laura was not suicidal, but that she allowed herself to be killed. This is the first instance we get of a smell like scorched engine oil. And this is Dr. Jacoby describing what it smelled like the night Jacques Renault was strangled at the hospital. So this brings up an interesting point. Okay, so after the fact, I'm a few episodes into season 2. I'm just kind of watching, mulling through, taking notes. And I'm thinking about Leland's hair. Why is Leland's hair white? Why does he look so much different than the Leland we know? Well, I think this ties to the whole Tulpa theory in The Return, where you have you have several Tulpas of Diane, you have the one Tulpa, or two Tulpas of Cooper. So I think, and this could be completely debunked because of the fact that Leland in season 2 later in this season is found out to be the killer, and then I think they show Bob like leaving his body or something. So it could be just Bob possessing Leland's body. But to me, it gives it away because you have the scorched engine oil smell off of Leland the night that his hair turned white, and the night that he was like scouring through the hospital going to kill people and stuff. So it's really interesting to me because it's almost like, okay, so did that Leland leave, go to the Black Lodge and swap out with the Tulpa, and then that night the Tulpa came and killed Jacques Renault? I don't know. Bobby goes to visit Shelley in the hospital because Shelley's got the smoke inhalation. She's real messed up from being tied up in the mill. And this is in a way paralleled because I've heard that Twin Peaks is partly called Twin because it has a lot of parallels, and that is innate in the idea of the Tulpa, but it's also like in the plot even. Like here in this episode we had Donna go visit James in jail, and now we're having Bobby come visit Shelley in the hospital. So it's just kind of a young couple visiting each other in a time of need type thing. So then Cooper and Ed talk about when Ed first met Nadine, and this is where Ed actually admits to having shot out Nadine's eye while they were pheasant hunting on their honeymoon, which is like an insane story, but he just kind of lays it all out there for Cooper. And then in my notes I specifically wrote that here Albert is being a traditional dick, because that is who Albert is. So then, James shows up to see Big Ed, and then Cooper is starting to walk away, and he sees in a restroom in the hospital a body bag kind of hanging up in the shape of the smile, like a drape kind of effect. And this, to Cooper, is the smiling bag that the giant was telling him about. Oh yeah, so then throughout this hospital sequence, we've had mentions of how terrible the food is. So then for the punchline, the very end of the scene, doctor walks up to the nurse's counter and says, "You better speak to that kitchen. You better talk to those chefs, because this food is," pretty much he's just like the punchline for the joke. And then Norma gets to see Shelly, and she walks by Nadine's room and sees Big Ed holding Nadine's hand, and she gets really sad. And then Major Briggs and Bobby have a conversation about the future and about this vision that Major Briggs had of Bobby in the future. Well, at first he and Bobby are kind of just doing the small talk thing. They're, "Hey, how are you? I'm doing pretty good. How about you?" That kind of thing. And then, then Major Briggs is like recognizing that he has a moment, so he's like, "Okay, let me share this with my son." And basically, he describes this place that's kind of made of marble, and it's filled with light that he is in. And like right off the bat, just that description to me is kind of like the White Lodge in The Return, where the giant, Senorita Dido, all that kind of stuff is going on. So I think that's what he's talking about. And that might also kind of be confirmed when, I don't remember which episode it is, but somewhere in The Return, Coop is navigating the afterlife or whatever nether realm he's in, and he sees Major Briggs' head go by, and it says Blue Rose. And this is before you find out the whole thing about how Major Briggs is involved in season 3. So then anyway, it was this place filled with light, made of marble, and he was familiar with it, and it was like he had known it since he was a child. So then he hears a knock at the door, and he answers the door. He recognizes it as his son Bobby, and Bobby's just like really happy, and they hug, and it's like this really satisfying, just like father-son moment, it's like a wholesome moment. And then Major Briggs is confident in Bobby's future, and he's optimistic that Bobby will be happy and live a good life. And this gets Bobby really choked up, but then Major Briggs kind of brings it to a halt and is like, "I'll see you at dinner, son," or something like that. And then Bobby sits there for a minute. He's just like, "Thank you, sir." And you can tell Bobby has respect for his dad. He just struggles with it, I think, because he doesn't relate to his dad that much. And the moment where you kind of see him change, I think, is right here, is where Major Briggs is sharing this with Bobby. And I think there's some seed of goodness planted there, because of how Bobby ends up in The Return. So this is where, right at the very end, Bobby remembers seeing Hank shoot Leo. So I mean, and I don't think it was so Leo wouldn't kill Bobby, but it just so happened to be at that moment. And then we get a really great donut crime montage that is kind of a panning shot of these donuts that the crew has laid out on the table as Cooper and Albert explain all the evidence and all the facts that they've discovered about the case so far. And then Albert is still consistent with his smart mouth remarks, and so Andy has enough of it. And then after this, after Andy has his little spat with Albert, Coop declares who's been killed and who they can rule out, and he says, so this leaves the third man. Truman takes Pete back to his house from, I'm assuming, the hospital, because Pete had smoke inhalation. And then Pete, in the mail, got a note about Josie going to San Francisco, I believe. And then they talk about Catherine and Pete's relationship. And Pete is just honest with Truman about his feelings and the whole situation. And then the phone rings. There's a man who's calling from the Great Northern, who you then find out is from Hong Kong, who's looking for Josie. So then Ben and Jerry are back at the Great Northern, and Ben asks Jerry, have you seen Audrey today? And completely without having known that he saw his daughter in lingerie earlier, which is, it's like a really dark, ironic moment. And then, oh yeah, and then the two brothers go to see Hank, and they have a conversation with him about the whole situation with burning the mill down and all that. And then this is like one of the coolest scenes to me. It's so creepy. So the Hayward Dinner Club scene. If it is indeed a tulpa that we see here of Leland instead of Leland, I believe it's the tulpa malfunctioning, and it has to do with this real low-key innocent music that the girl's playing. And then he talks about Get Happy, so he sings the song Get Happy, and there's just something about it to me that kind of triggers, like, there's something not right, you know, here, and I don't think it's the same person that we've been seeing. I really don't. So anyway, Coop is signing off at the end of the night, talking to Diane on his voice recorder. I think he's talking about the lack of Norwegian singing in the Great Northern, so that's kind of just a funny little character moment. He goes to bed, goes to sleep, and then Audrey kind of dream prays to Cooper in a way. And then Audrey asks Cooper to help her if he can hear her. So then we get the fireman appearing again, and he appears in Coop's room while Coop's asleep, and you make sure he kind of like waves his hand in front of Coop's face to make sure he's asleep. And then it's a very strange moment, but it's, I kind of described it like the beginning of the first Harry Potter, how Dumbledore is like sucking all the lights into his little machine and like turning the lights out at night. It's kind of that same visual of all these lights like going sucked into the giant, and then the giant shooting it into Cooper. And it's just really interesting because that also could tie into the whole like gold ball idea of Laura Palmer and her being like the good in this world. So I don't know if maybe that was the giant giving Coop some more positive energy. I don't know. So then, yeah, this is like one of the creepiest moments right here at the end of the first episode of season 2. So they didn't want you to forget how creepy Twin Peaks could be. Ronette Pulaski is in the hospital, and she has a dream, kind of a fever dream slash PTSD episode about the events surrounding Laura's death. And then there's just some shots here that are terrifying because they are so reminiscent of things you see in Fire Walk with Me. There's a lot of really just like spine-chilling screaming, so it's really, really well done. So that was episode 1. Episode 2, Donna Hayward is tending to Mrs. Chalfont, and the little boy with the mask appears, and then they talked about creamed corn. So all of that is expanded on in Fire Walk with Me, and then the creamed corn thing is there till the end of Twin Peaks. That's Garmin Boja is it. That's the thing that keeps popping up. And for those who aren't familiar with Garmin Boja represents pain and suffering in Twin Peaks, but it's visually personified by creamed corn. So anytime you see anything that looks like creamed corn, that's probably what they're referencing. Someone there has some level of pain and suffering, or has seen pain and suffering, and that's why that's there, just so you know, you guys know. So then Ben and Jerry discuss further, and they talk about which ledger they should burn of the mill, and they talk about the legalities, what burning this one would do, what burning this one would do, and then they decide to roast marshmallows, and Jerry Horn says, "Where are those hickory sticks?" And he just says it so funny. Like, Tommy and I were just like laughing. I don't know why. It was so silly. Oh yeah, and then there's a scene here with Andy, and he has the scotch tape. He's got a piece like stuck to his forehead that's just like balled up on his forehead, but then he's also just like, he can't figure it out. I feel really bad for him. And then the log lady says to, there's a lot of funny moments at the beginning of this episode. Log lady says to Major Briggs, "You wear shiny objects on your chest." And Tommy and I just lost it when she said that. And it's just really sweet to see how patient and respectful Major Briggs is of like anyone, of any and everyone that he encounters. And then yeah, Lucy has like some ninja skills here. She actually kills the fly that's bothering her, so that was pretty cool. Ben Horn calls Truman to tell him that Audrey's missing, and then Truman tells Coop, and of course Coop is shocked and worried instantly. And it's weird. So here, Leland sees, have you seen this man of like the police sketch of Bob? And he says that he knew the man from like next door since he was a child. And I don't know if that's Bob pretending, or if that's Leland telling the truth, or if it's some memory that's been implanted in Leland so that he says that and he is thrown off of Bob's trail, maybe? I don't know. I had a question, okay, because there's this really weird scene here. Is having a cowgirl vacuum while you're tied up and blindfolded really a kink? Is that really, like, are people really into that? Because I would like to know, because that does not seem, that seems like far too specific and ridiculous to actually be a sexual fantasy, but please let me know. Major Briggs goes to visit Cooper, and he has a message for him. And there's a quote here that Tommy wanted me to make note of. Major Briggs says, "Any bureaucracy that functions in secret inevitably lends itself to corruption." And it is a really powerful quote, but to me it's kind of an obvious thing said in an eloquent way, you know? But Tommy thought it was really cool, so I wanted to include that. The Giant's message to Cooper is actually relayed by space waves and then received by Major Briggs. So he brings Cooper the printout of their frequency like monitoring they've been doing, and they get Cooper in a row, like spelled like 5 times, and then they also get "the owls are not what they seem," and that's like verbatim what the Giant said to Cooper, so that was pretty kind of creepy. So then here we get literally one of the best scenes in all of Twin Peaks. I found this really cool meme of this scene that I posted on my Instagram, and I think I tweeted it out, but the original artist actually liked it, and you know, it was really cool, and then we connected on Instagram, so shout out to Patrick and the awesome artist that made this great meme. I want to put it here just so you guys can see it because it's really funny. It's this terrible scene where James and Maddie and Donna are sitting around playing. James is playing the guitar, and they're doing like this weird chorus back and forth type song. And I don't know if it's called Just You and I, but the words are literally just you and I. And I'm pretty sure that's it. And they sing it back and forth. And then at this point, Maddie looks over into the foyer, or actually out of the foyer into the living room of, I'm assuming, the Hayward house. And she sees Bob, and Bob pops up walking toward her at this really like rabid pace. And it's not like fast, but it's very intentional and violent. So I thought that was really creepy. And it's a shot that if you go on like any Twin Peaks Reddit, someone has like put that shot there and been like, I'm just gonna leave this here, because if you've seen the show enough times, you'll recognize it and be like, oh my god, Bob is here. And then Cooper has a Bob dream here, and Tommy also wanted me to give a special shout out to Frank Silva, the actor that portrayed Bob. Just a cool little Twin Peaks trivia thing for people that aren't super familiar with the show. Frank Silva was a set decorator on the set of season 1, and he ended up accidentally being in a shot of, I think, Sarah Palmer in Laura's bedroom. Well, come to find, or no, Sarah Palmer in the living room of their house. And come to find out, Lynch sees that and is like, you know what, keep it in. And they're like, okay, you don't want to go reshoot that? And he's like, no, it's fine. So then, in a moment of divine improvisation, although Lynch insists that he never improvises anything, they incorporated that into the show. So a mistake was made into a plot point, which I just love that. I think that's so cool. I think it's really cool that they just rolled with it. And Lynch was like, he or Mark Frost, I can't remember, one of them got the idea for it then. So then they just like rolled with it, and they made this whole character off of that one little mistake. So that wraps up episode 2. We're gonna be on to episodes 6 and 7 here in the next week, or not episode 6 and 7. I'm sorry, episodes 21 and 22, I believe, are the next we're doing. We're just gonna do the close of the season, and then we're gonna move on to Fire Walk With Me next week, and then the 4th week will be in the return. So if you guys have any questions or any comments, let me know. But yeah, otherwise we're on to the end of season 2. Thank you guys so much for watching. Really appreciate you guys.